Have you ever noticed that the sharpest minds, the ones who seem to see reality more clearly than others, often prefer being alone? It's not because they hate people. It's not because they lack social skills. The truth is far more unsettling. They've discovered something that most people spend their entire lives running from. They've realized that solitude is not loneliness, it's freedom. What I'm about to share with you isn't a defense of antisocial behavior. It isn't an excuse to cut yourself off from the world. Instead, this is an exploration of why solitude, when chosen deliberately, has been the secret weapon of some of the greatest minds in history. And more importantly, why people who cultivate the ability to be alone often develop a kind of intelligence that feels unsettling to everyone else. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of philosophy's most relentless truth-tellers, understood this better than almost anyone. He deliberately spent much of his life apart from society. Not because he was broken, not because he failed at relationships, but because he saw through the illusions that keep most people chained to crowds, cliques, and constant social performance. And what he discovered in solitude still unsettles people today. Schopenhauer didn't see isolation as an escape. He saw it as the only way to access the full power of independent thought. While most people dilute their intelligence through conformity, compromise, and endless noise, the rare few who dare to walk alone discover something radical, the mind's true potential. That's why Schopenhauer's perspective on solitude is terrifying to many. It forces us to admit that most of our connection isn't genuine connection at all. It's a survival strategy, a constant exchange of validation, conformity, and distraction that prevents real thinking from ever taking root. Schopenhauer once wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." At first, that sounds like a poetic exaggeration, but the deeper meaning is clear. The moment you need other people to tell you who you are, what to believe, or how to feel, you've surrendered the very thing that makes you human, the capacity to think independently. And that is exactly where we begin. Because if solitude really is a doorway to terrifying intelligence, then the first step is understanding what most people sacrifice the moment they refuse to be alone. Schopenhauer recognized a truth that most people never dare to face. The moment you step into a group, a part of your intelligence begins to die. Even in a simple conversation between two people, your mind is no longer fully your own. A hidden part of it is busy adjusting, softening, monitoring, making sure you say the right things to keep your place in the tribe. Think about how often you've laughed at a joke you didn't find funny. How many times have you agreed with an idea you didn't truly believe, just to avoid friction? How often have you swallowed the strange, dangerous thought that rose in your mind, the thought that might have changed everything, because you sensed it would make you stand out? That is the price of belonging. Schopenhauer called it the will of the masses, and he knew it was a slow form of intellectual suicide. Most people never realize that their opinions, their tastes, even their emotional reactions are not truly theirs. They are borrowed, sculpted by the crowd, fed by the media, molded by the constant pressure to conform. And here's the terrifying part. You don't even notice it happening. Your brain evolved to keep you acceptable. The instant others are present, you become less original, less creative, less willing to follow truth wherever it leads. The group doesn't just influence your thinking, it takes control of it. This is why so few people ever experience the raw power of their own mind. They are never alone with it. From family chatter to workplace politics, from endless social obligations to the digital noise of phones and screens, most people live surrounded, invaded, colonized by the thoughts of others. But the solitary person makes a different calculation. They've decided that the unfiltered voice of their own mind is worth more than constant approval. They've learned that their best ideas do not appear in group brainstorming or casual chatter. They rise only in silence. Watch carefully the next time you see a highly intelligent person in a group. They often seem a little detached, not because they don't care, but because part of them is quietly observing how the group thinks, how conformity kills originality, how truth gets traded for belonging. They know the cost of inclusion, and they've decided the price is too high. Most people confuse solitude with loneliness. To them, being alone feels like a punishment, a reminder of emptiness. They cannot stand silence because silence forces them to face themselves, and they don't like what they find. But Schopenhauer made a critical distinction. There's a world of difference between the person who is alone because they cannot connect with others, and the person who deliberately chooses solitude because they have built an inner life so rich, so alive, that it outshines the noise of the crowd. This is what he called the art of being alone without being lonely. Think about how most people experience isolation, boredom, anxiety, restlessness. They crave distraction, constant input, entertainment. Why? Because their minds have never been cultivated. Left in silence, they discover there's nothing inside, only echoes of the voices they've consumed. But the intelligent, solitary person has built something different. They've turned inward and discovered an entire universe. Through books, philosophy, art, and reflection, they've created a private world where solitude isn't emptiness, but abundance. Schopenhauer himself described this as the world as representation, the mind's ability to construct meaning, beauty, and depth entirely within itself. To someone who has never developed this inner richness, a solitary person appears almost alien. How can they sit in silence for hours without feeling restless? How can they walk alone for miles and seem content? How can they look so at ease in their own company? The answer is terrifying to those who rely on constant stimulation. Intelligent solitude reveals that human happiness does not require endless social validation. It does not require external entertainment. It does not even require approval from others. Instead, it requires a cultivated mind, the discipline to think deeply, the courage to wrestle with difficult questions, the patience to nurture creative ideas, the capacity to find wonder in the workings of thought itself. This is why solitary people often appear mysterious, even threatening. Their contentment in aloneness destroys the fragile illusion that happiness must come from outside, from other people, from society, from constant distraction. Their very existence is a quiet rebellion against a world terrified of silence. For them, solitude is not a prison, it is home. History gives us striking confirmation of this truth. When the Great Plague shut down Cambridge in 1665, Isaac Newton retreated to his family estate in Woolsthorpe. While others feared isolation, Newton used solitude as fuel. In that single period of quiet, he laid the foundations of calculus, explored the mysteries of light, and even began formulating the law of gravitation. What looked like exile from society became the most productive year of his life. Solitude did not weaken him. It revealed his genius. Schopenhauer believed that true solitude doesn't just protect the mind. It unlocks something far more dangerous: intellectual independence. Most people never think thoughts that are entirely their own. Even their creativity is shaped and filtered by the boundaries of what their peers, families, and cultures consider reasonable or acceptable. Every conversation, every group, every environment carries with it an invisible fence, a set of rules about which ideas can be entertained and which must be rejected without question. But when you are truly alone, those fences disappear. In solitude, the mind can wander into forbidden territory. You can follow strange ideas that would sound absurd if spoken aloud. You can nurture curiosities that have no immediate practical value, that seem like a waste of time to others. And yet, history shows us this is where the greatest breakthroughs are born. Newton's laws of motion were not created in a committee. Einstein's theory of relativity did not emerge from a team-building exercise. Darwin's revolutionary work on evolution grew not from endless debates but from years of private reflection. Schopenhauer's own philosophy, sharp, radical, and uncompromising, was forged in long stretches of deliberate solitude. Nietzsche understood this well. He often retreated into the Swiss Alps, walking alone for hours in silence. He wrote that all truly profound thoughts are conceived while walking. Free from the pressure of groups, he let his mind wander into territory others would dismiss as madness. Out of this solitude came ideas that redefined philosophy, the will to power, the death of God, eternal recurrence. Ideas that could never have survived the suffocating consensus of a crowd. These thinkers were not antisocial. They weren't avoiding people because of fear. They were protecting the conditions that allowed them to think thoughts that had never been thought before. They understood that the most valuable contribution they could offer humanity wasn't conformity, it was originality. But here's the cost. Intellectual independence is lonely. When you follow a path that no one else sees, you walk without approval. No one reassures you that you're right. No one confirms you're on the right track. In fact, the world often ridicules, dismisses, or even condemns the person who refuses to think like everyone else. This is why solitude requires courage. To sit with your own untested ideas, to live with the possibility that they are either nonsense or genius, takes more strength than most people will ever possess. And yet, it is precisely in this space of uncertainty that true breakthroughs are born. The solitary individual is willing to pay the price of isolation because they know the alternative is worse. A life spent recycling the same thoughts as everyone else, never touching the edges of what the mind is truly capable of. Schopenhauer understood something that modern psychology is only now beginning to confirm. The mind's energy is limited. Every thought, every conversation, every interaction drains from the same pool of attention. And once that energy is spent, it cannot be reclaimed. Most people waste this energy without realizing it. They scatter their focus across trivial conversations, endless digital distractions, shallow relationships, and obligations that bring no real value. They treat attention as if it were infinite, but it isn't. It is the most precious currency of the mind. This is why intelligent people often choose solitude. They know that social interaction, no matter how pleasant, comes at a hidden cost. Every gathering requires energy to decode unspoken agendas, to navigate group dynamics, to manage impressions, to anticipate emotional reactions. On the surface, it looks like harmless small talk. In reality, it is an enormous drain on mental resources. The solitary person has done the calculation and decided the price is too high. They would rather spend their attention on thinking, creating, studying, and building than on maintaining endless circles of shallow connection. This doesn't mean they cut themselves off completely. In fact, the few relationships they do keep are often deep, rare, and enduring. But what they refuse is the constant leakage of mental energy that comes from superficial interactions. For them, focus is sacred, and solitude is the shield that protects it. Schopenhauer lived this truth ruthlessly. He walked alone. He dined alone. He structured his life not around other people's demands, but around the preservation of his own mental power. To outsiders, it looked strange, even antisocial, but the results spoke for themselves, a body of work so sharp and enduring that it still unsettles the modern world. The lesson is clear. To protect your mind, you must protect your attention. And solitude is the most powerful way to do it. Most people will never understand this. They will spend their lives pouring their mental energy into gossip, entertainment, and the exhausting performance of belonging. But the solitary individual knows that the mind's true potential can only be realized when its energy is guarded, concentrated, and directed towards something greater than distraction. One of the most unsettling gifts of solitude is vision. When you step outside the constant chatter of social life, you begin to see it for what it really is, a cycle of repetitive games, illusions, and performances. Schopenhauer called this philosophical vision, the capacity to observe human behavior without being trapped inside it. To most people, the dramas of daily life feel urgent and significant. Who said what? Who gained status? Who offended whom? But to the solitary observer, these dramas shrink into patterns. You notice how the same conflicts repeat endlessly across families, workplaces, and societies. You begin to see the machinery of fear, desire, and ego that drives people more than reason ever does. This clarity can be liberating, but it also comes with a cost. Because once you see the patterns, it becomes difficult to participate in them unconsciously. The rituals of status seeking, the endless pursuit of approval, the small lies people tell to survive in groups. These lose their power over you, but they also lose their charm. The solitary thinker often finds themselves alienated not by choice, but by perception. They cannot pretend that the rituals matter as much as everyone insists they do. They see through the illusion, and that makes ordinary life feel strangely hollow. This is why intelligent loners can appear detached, even cold. But it isn't contempt, it's clarity. They've traded the comfort of belonging for the honesty of independent vision. They still interact with society, but they do so consciously, as observers and occasional participants, rather than as people who depend on the crowd for meaning. Schopenhauer warned that this kind of vision is both a gift and a burden. To see clearly is to recognize the suffering and illusions that most people need in order to function. It's why so many retreat into distraction rather than face the raw truth of existence. But the solitary person accepts this burden. They understand that wisdom is not free. It costs comfort, it costs belonging, it costs innocence. And yet this clarity gives them something far more valuable: authenticity. They no longer live on borrowed beliefs or borrowed priorities. They live from the ground of their own perception. Schopenhauer's most profound insight about solitude was this: people who choose to be alone are not rejecting humanity. They are preparing to serve it in a way that most will never understand. Carl Jung had a similar revelation in his later years. He built a retreat by Lake Zurich, a stone tower where he lived and worked in near isolation. There he recorded what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, diving into dreams, myths, and archetypes. Jung understood that solitude was not an escape, but a descent, a journey inward where the deepest truths of the psyche reveal themselves. Without that solitude, his psychology would never have taken shape. To the outside world, the solitary thinker looks withdrawn, even selfish. But beneath the silence, something is being forged. Creativity, wisdom, original thought, deep understanding. All of these require conditions that ordinary social life rarely provides. In solitude, the mind stretches into places it cannot reach while entangled in the noise of the crowd. Solitude is not escape, it is preparation. The great paradox is that the people who seem most distant from society often end up giving it the most. Think of the scientists, philosophers, artists, and visionaries who spent years in relative isolation only to return with discoveries and creations that reshaped human life. They weren't hiding from humanity. They were cultivating something to bring back to it. This is why Schopenhauer found the intelligence of solitary people so terrifying. They threaten the foundation of a social system built on conformity and constant validation. They've discovered that meaning, identity, and purpose can be drawn from within, not borrowed from the crowd. That makes them untouchable, independent, free. And freedom in a world addicted to belonging is always frightening. The solitary person is not antisocial. They are not damaged, broken, or afraid. They have simply seen that the highest possibilities of the human mind demand silence. They demand courage. They demand the willingness to be alone long enough to hear one's own thoughts fully, without interruption. That is why these individuals often seem mysterious to us. When you meet someone who is truly at peace in their own company, who can sit in silence without restlessness, who finds richness in the depths of their own inner world, you are not just seeing a loner, You are seeing someone who has cultivated a form of intelligence that emerges only in solitude. And this is what makes them terrifyingly intelligent. Not just their capacity to think, but their willingness to do so in defiance of everything society demands. They walk away from the crowd not because they despise it, but because they know the crowd cannot give them what they need. The next time you encounter someone who seems strangely content being alone, remember Schopenhauer's warning. You may be in the presence of someone who has unlocked a form of intelligence that others can barely imagine. An intelligence born in silence, sharpened in solitude, and carried back into the world as a gift. They are not running away from life, they are running toward truth.